This happened a few years ago. My mom, sister, and I had just finished a day of outlet shopping in Lancaster, PA, and were on our way home on a local road headed home. My sister was driving, I was in the passenger seat, and my mom was in the back of the minivan right behind my seat. It was dark on the road, and there weren't many cars or streetlights. As we're driving at a good clip, I notice a man walking along the side of the road up ahead. He is tall, skinny, with abnormally long arms, and was strangely wearing a sort of burgundy three-piece suit. I think nothing of it as he's coming closer, because I figure he broke down and is walking to a gas station not far down the road. Suddenly, as we're about to pass him, he seems to jump onto the passenger side door, inches from me. We're driving fast, but he's not falling off. My sister and I both start screaming, and she's swerving the car. He begins clawing at the window and violently tugging at the door handle. I clamp onto the door and scream, "He's trying to get in!" This seems to last at least 20 seconds. And then suddenly, he's gone. He didn't fall. I look back. Nothing and no one is there. And my mom saw nothing except my sister and me screaming. She's screaming at us, trying to understand why we were freaking out. She didn't see him at all, even though he would have been right in front of her. My sister and I, once we regained our composure and stopped shaking, started comparing what just happened. We described the exact same person and the exact same experience. I've spoken to several people who have experienced the same thing on that road, and I haven't driven on that road since that day.
When I was around 9 years old, I had a sleepover at my childhood best friend's house. It started out like any normal sleepover. We had pasta, and mind you, she was allergic to butter, so she just ate it plain. This is important, I promise. I always had to wash my hands when I ate something she was allergic to, for the sake of her safety. By the time bedtime comes around, we went to sleep in her twin-sized bed. This was where stuff gets weird. I had woken up in the middle of the night, for no apparent reason, but I had noticed the hallway light was on, and the door of my friend's room was cracked. My curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to check out who was still up at this late hour. I peered my head into the hallway and didn't see anyone. I shut the light off and decided to try and get some sleep. Likewise, I figured someone forgot to shut the light off, so that's why I shut it off myself. Furthermore, I laid in bed for about 10 minutes when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs near the door. The hallway light turned on, and I noticed a figure standing in the crack of the doorway. The door slowly opened to my friend's mom. Now, this might seem like she was checking on us, but she turned her head like a dog in confusion. I had my eyes closed almost all the way to the point where I knew she couldn't tell I was up. My friend all of a sudden rises up, says nothing, and runs to her mom standing at the door. My friend starts crying, and without saying anything, she points in my direction and begins crying even louder. Then her mother finally spoke in reference to me. "Did she touch butter, honey?" I was so confused, and I couldn't understand why her mother would ask such a dumb question when she saw me wash my hands. I tried my best to pretend I was asleep, but before my friend could respond to her mom's question, she pointed at me once again and said the words, "I know you're awake." I refused to open my eyes and show that I was awake. They eventually left the room, but before my friend's mother left with her, she said in the creepiest voice, almost demonic, "I'll be back soon. You better be asleep." I was on the verge of tears. They closed the door and shut off the hallway light. A few minutes passed until I heard knocking on the walls. I covered myself in blankets for comfort and somehow managed to fall asleep. When I had woken up the next morning, my friend was sleeping peacefully next to me. as if nothing had occurred that night. I woke her up and asked her what her problem was last night and why she was crying. She looked at me, completely dumbfounded. Her mother and my friend had no recollection of the previous night, but I knew for a fact that what happened was real. This wasn't a nightmare. This was something entirely different. I never slept over again after that. It turns out that a woman who looked identical to my friend's mom died in the house from a house fire. Maybe I had seen that woman. I still have no idea what to make of this situation, but occurrences with the paranormal began after I left that house. I have many more stories, but this one still confuses me to this day.
I am an artist. I work as a character designer in an uptown studio that primarily deals with in-game cinematic, but sometimes also makes outsourced work for other animation studios. I lived in a small apartment surrounded by canvas with art studies of different kinds. There were clouds, mountains, weapons, and most importantly, anatomy. Each workday, for me, began around 6:30 p.m., even though the studio I worked at began by 8. As I said, I worked uptown. What I neglected to say was I worked downtown 2 cities away. Getting to work meant I had to take a train and pass several stops before getting uptown, only to get the chance to stop a cab to get to work. My morning route was me leaving the house and taking a bus to get to the train station. On this particular day, I got to work before a load of work was dumped on my table. There was something about this morning that didn't feel right to me. I felt like this most times at work. It tended to be like this when you have to wake 3 hours before work time just to wait for a bus. The feeling was normal, but today was different in a way that I couldn't explain. So I brought out my "How have you survived this long" tablet and began working away at the tasks that I was given. It wasn't long before my stomach started rumbling and my head was banging. The more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. It got so bad that my supervisor rang me up. She asked me if I was all right, and I said that I was. I had to be. "You look like you're about to pass. You should go see a doctor or something." I can't go, I thought to myself, even as I promised to go. She saw through all that and ordered me to go home even if I couldn't or didn't want to see a doctor. I grumbled a bit before she spoke with me with an unmistakable finality that had me packing my workspace home. I apologized for feeling sick, in which she replied that it was okay and would be checked on later. I said okay before leaving the office. I felt lightheaded as I moved, so I waved down a taxi and asked to drop me near a terminal. The taxi driver asked if I was all right after trying unsuccessfully to stifle 3 successive coughs. I promised him I was good and wouldn't pass anything to him. I couldn't guarantee any of my promises, but it seemed to put the man at ease. He took a sharp turn off the street and was 15 blocks away from my stop when I spotted the park to the left. "Can you stop, please?" I asked him. He tried to tell me that my spot was still far away when I insisted on it. For some strange reason, I felt a strong urge to be in the park at that moment. After paying him, I walked into the park. There was a sharp difference between the smell of the park and the area outside it. And although it made me feel better, I still felt terrible. Not just as bad as I felt in the studio. I considered going back to work, but ultimately decided against it. I walked further into the park, found a bench to sit down on, and looked at everything around me. I sat there for a long time before bringing out my drawing pad, the non-digital type, and began sketching the landscape in front of me. A bit about my route again. I wake up in the morning, prepare to wait for the bus, and when the bus comes, I wait for the train. Then the train arrives, and then I move uptown. Between the wait for the train and getting uptown, the the delay in the terminal can be brutal, only made somewhat tolerable by the people in it. There's the guy who plays guitar on the subway. He plays pretty well, but most times is just ignored by most people. He is always there. Sometimes when I can spare a change, I make sure it gets to him. So I was sitting on the bench when I saw him pass me. He recognized me and waved. At first, I was confused before recognizing him. He told me about his music before asking if I wouldn't mind drawing him. I agreed and continued sketching him out. People threw me a look as they passed. It was something I was used to. People acted a certain way when they saw art. They were people who saw it and smiled, happy and impressed. They were neutral people, and others measured themselves. You could see it in their eyes. I finished drawing him. I was about to give it to him when I thought about something. I asked him if I could get it to him as I wanted to complete detailed work on it. I could see that he was stressed out by the idea, and I told him to show me where he lived. He was homeless, and he lived below a bridge. I told him I didn't mind, and he should show me where to bring it. He agreed and showed me. I promised to get him the full print when I was done. It took me a bit of effort, juggling the work. I didn't quite understand why I was going at it with the studio job. It took a week, but when I was done, I moved over to the bridge, but didn't see any sign of the man. I moved through all the tents there, but didn't see him. I decided to ask around, and that's when I received the news that shook my world even today. When I showed them the picture of the man, I hadn't even gotten his name. I was informed that Guitar Joe, what they knew him as, had been dead for 3 years now, and I couldn't have possibly seen him in the park a week ago. I didn't understand then and still don't understand now.
I was driving across country with my mom and sister when I was 16, and my sister was 20. It was late, but we were well rested still and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas and a bathroom break, so we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at the gas station, as well as a small gray car parked at the pump in front of us, with 2 young men standing still outside of it. When we got there, everything felt wrong. We'd been on the road for days and seen many rest stops at night, and had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went inside, and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was watching the car in front of us, and the 2 men had not moved at all. Not an inch. They weren't talking. They weren't on phones. Furthermore, they were just standing there, still as stone. My sister and mom came running back out of the car, and when they got in, the 2 men slowly turned to look at us while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. And I swear to we all saw the same thing. They had eyes dark as pitch and empty. Truly empty. Not black, not reflecting any light at all, just a void. We sped out of there and didn't stop until we were in the next city. The worst thing about the entire experience, we couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, and we couldn't find it on Google Maps or any paper map we had. Likewise, we even asked locals about the creepy gas station out on that stretch of road, and got only confused looks. We've traveled on that interstate since, and there is no rest stop. After we moved into our home, we were told a woman had died there at the hands of her abusive husband. She hated men. My dad would wake up with scratches all over himself, and whenever my brother was mean to my sister or I, he would have scratches on him as well. One day, my brother hurt our sister. He hit her with something. When he woke up later that night, he had a horrible bloody nose. The day we moved out, my brother accidentally broke his twin's arm, trying out a wrestling move. He swears that he would have died that night if it wasn't our last in the house.
All right, thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you heard, please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time.